presentations is talking a little bit about the history of the subject that we're digging into. That's a little more difficult on trees unless you're a botanist and you want to get way deep into the history of plants and trees and things like that. So instead of that, I thought I'd put up a list of 10 famous trees. And actually, if you Google famous trees, it's really, really hard to find just 10 famous trees. There are all kinds of trees out there that, believe it or not, are considered famous. So here's just one of the many lists you can find if you go searching online. And I'm not going to go through all of these for you, but there are literally trees that own themselves, actually the descendants of trees that own themselves on this list. There's trees on this list that are somewhere between 2,500 and 5,000 years old, if you can believe that. There's trees that have stood since the revolution. There's trees that have come back since 9/11 and the bombings there. So when, again, you start actually looking into some of the historical events that trees are associated with and how long they live, absolutely fascinating. So before we talk about kind of some of the negative impacts of trees, I wanted to touch on some of the benefits of trees because generally speaking, homeowners like and want trees, and there's some very, very good reasons for that. So let's look at a couple of those before we start looking at why trees are bad for houses. From a monetary standpoint, trees can actually help your bottom line. They reduce heating and cooling bills by helping you save energy. They naturally cool a home during the summer, and they provide shelter from cold and wind in the winter months. They increase home values. On average, each large tree at your property, and especially in your front yard, adds about 1% to the house's sales price, and large mature trees can actually add up to 10% of property value for a house. The presence of shade trees helps reduce wear and tear on roads and pavement surfaces. It helps keep infrastructure costs down. And psychologically, trees are actually good for business. Shoppers tend to spend more time and money in tree-lined commercial districts, and studies have shown they'll spend up to 12% more for goods located in those areas. Trees also kind of obviously benefit the environment. They do that by cleaning the air. They actually remove particulate matter and other forms of air pollution up to almost 1 million metric tons per year. They help treat water pollution because they slow down the water flow, and they can help reduce waterborne toxic waste and then actually metabolize it and neutralize it. So they're actually extremely effective natural water filters. They handle storm runoff and they reduce flooding. So during heavy rainstorms, tree roots will actually soak up and filter storm water, and their leaves will actually collect and also hold some of that storm water until it can evaporate. So there's a whole bunch of different ways they're actually good for the environment. They help reduce noise. So they can provide shade, they will absorb light, and then through evapotranspiration, I think I got that right, they can actively cool the air, especially in a cityscape, by up to 10 or 15 degrees. And then they reduce noise by absorbing sound, especially at high frequencies. So when you plant a band of trees on a raised berm, like is often done here when we're developing a neighborhood, that can actually reduce street noise by 6 to 10 decibels. And on top of all these environmental benefits, they actually tend to make people healthier. There's the really obvious benefit of, well, through photosynthesis, trees turn carbon dioxide into oxygen, which we obviously need to breathe. They catch those tiny little particles from the air on their leaves and branches, reducing air pollution and actually sometimes helping with things like asthma in a city situation. There are actually documented psychological links between trees, green spaces, and mortality rates. If you remember, we talked about death in the home last week. Trees can actually help with mortality rate. Residents of tree-lined communities, statistically speaking, are more likely to be physically active and less likely to become overweight or obese. And trees have been strongly linked to reduced symptoms of depression and increased life satisfaction. So the presence of trees has been proven to psychologically improve the condition of people with neurodegenerative diseases. Got to think a second to say that one right. So trees obviously come with a lot of benefits, and it's no wonder that they're so desirable in a housing situation. But we have to be careful about what trees we plant around houses. So the next thing we are going to talk about here, and maybe of a little bit more practical application for those of us in the real estate business, are what species of trees should you never plant around a house? And the pictures here are two of the more common ones that we see every day in the inspection world. And they're great examples. They're almost case studies of trees you shouldn't plant anywhere near your house, and maybe trees you shouldn't plant at all anymore. So the tree on the left here is actually a silver maple, super common tree in residential situations. And then the tree on the right is actually a Bradford pear, which is also super common in residential applications and is commonly used as a landscape tree for neighborhoods and communities as well. So let's take a closer look at both of those, because really, honestly, you really shouldn't use these in a residential situation. So the first one we're going to look at is the silver maple. And I will tell you guys, I have got a giant silver maple tree in my front yard as we speak. The builder put it there when we built this house back in 2004. It has honestly grown like a weed. It's been a very healthy, very substantive tree, but it does suffer from some of these problems here that we're going to talk about. And these are the things that make silver maples kind of undesirable for planting in a residential location. The reason we see so many of them is that after World War II, homeowners planted silver maples looking for quick shade, a very appealing function and form. They look like a tree is supposed to look, but they didn't pay attention to the size that those trees can grow to, nor some of the characteristics of that species. They were basically planted for shade and because they look like a tree should look, and because they grow fast. The problem with silver maples is that their roots tend to be very shallow and are damaging to sidewalks and driveways. And I just realized I should have gone out and taken a picture of my front sidewalk, because the silver maple we have in our front yard is doing exactly that. It's putting shallow roots actually right along and under the sidewalk, and it's caused it to collapse in a couple of spots, and it's caused it to heave in a couple other spots. So silver maple roots can be especially problematic because they are very shallow. They're also, relatively speaking, weak trees. Their trunks are susceptible to decay, and their branches are highly susceptible to wind and ice and snow loads. And we haven't had any particular problems with this tree, and I've probably pruned it in ways that you shouldn't. But generally speaking, that relatively weak branch structure causes lots of problems with silver maple trees. One of the things that made them desirable is also, ironically, one of the things that makes them undesirable. They can grow to be 60 to 80 feet tall and 30 to 50 feet wide, and they can even get larger to that. So if you plant them too close to your house, which a lot of people will do, they can become pretty damaging pretty quickly to your house. So all of that means today, arborists remove more silver maples than any other species. So they are not a good tree species really to plant anywhere close to your house. The other one we see all the time is the Bradford pear. And here in my neighborhood, there's probably half a dozen Bradford pears still growing at the entranceway here that the builder planted when they developed this neighborhood beginning in about 2000. The reason people like them is, well, it's their appearance and their symmetry. They're a very symmetrical, very round, visually appealing tree. And a lot of them, again, were planted post World War II, making them kind of a symbol of America's post war suburban expansion. They're also desirable because they flourish in poor soil and they thrive anywhere. So you can plop them in the ground and they will just grow without a lot of care, and a lot of maintenance. The reason they're a bad species to plant, the tree branch unions, so where branches split and fork on these trees, they are highly susceptible due to wind, ice, snow loads. They break and they split even, I can't even talk today. They break and they split easily. And I can tell you guys again through firsthand experience, the Bradford pears in our neighborhood here, a lot of those have lost pretty substantial limbs over the years due to wind and snow and ice. They are not a strong species of tree. They also cross-pollinate with other pear species like calorie pears and produce fruits that litter streets, driveways, sidewalks that birds love to eat and then poop out everywhere. So they are messy, messy trees that cross-pollinate with other species. They have become so problematic from an arborist point of view that Bradford pears are actually now considered an invasive species because they will grow just about anywhere, but unfortunately they're weak and susceptible to storm damage. So Bradford pears are another of those species that are really pretty, but you should probably never plant anywhere near a house. And if you do plant them anywhere, you need to be ready for a lot of maintenance on them. Other undesirable species, Norway or Crimson King maple trees are problematic. They are not indigenous to the US, but they do adapt to a lot of various conditions and are actually one of the more versatile species of maple tree. The problems with them are that while they offer great shade, they kill any other plant or shrub that tries to thrive around it because that dense shade canopy prevents other plants from getting sunlight. So if you plant one of these in your yard, you're going to end up with a bare patch of yard underneath of it. And on top of that, they have very fibrous, greedy roots that absorb all the nutrients from the soil before other plants get a chance to do so. So they're pretty, they provide a lot of shade, but they kill everything around them. We see a lot of weeping willow trees around here because they were planted to absorb groundwater, which we have quite a bit of here in central Indiana. They have a very aggressive and strong root system, which unfortunately means that not only are they going to absorb all the water in the ground, but they're going to crack the pavement of your driveway or your sidewalk, and they are very good about getting into sewer and drain lines as well. They are very, very water hungry and will also starve other landscaping around them, and they have a relatively short lifespan of about 30 years, and they actually grow weaker as they get older and more mature, making those weeping willow trees kind of a physical hazard as well. So while they're very pretty, and a lot of them are planted here to help absorb water, they are not a good long-term species to plant on your property. And on top of all of that, they're very, very messy as well, dropping a lot of leaves and branches and things of that nature. So those are kind of the top four for us here in the Midwest that, well, you shouldn't plant around your house, but there are other undesirable species as well. And unfortunately, some of these are long established, actually good tree species that have other problems. American elms are susceptible to Dutch elm disease. Ash trees, which used to be everywhere here in the Midwest, are susceptible to emerald ash borers. And then there's other species like white mulberry that are invasive, the calorie pear trees, which are now considered invasive. Even a couple species I love, like blue spruce, are non-native and susceptible to diseases around here. Black walnut, black locusts are considered invasive and crowding out native species. And things like box elder are very fast growing with weak wood and relatively short lifespans. So there are quite a number of trees that when you start doing the research, you really shouldn't plant on your property. So what species should you plant when you're looking to, put some trees around your house? Well, trees you should plant, let's start with some kind of general terms first. Always remember that trees are an investment. So look at the function of that tree. What kind of shade is it supposed to provide? What kind of aesthetic value? Is it supposed to be a windbreak? Is it supposed to provide privacy? Is it a fruit tree? What do you want that tree to do? And then look at the form and size of that tree. So you have to select the right form of tree to complement that desired function, and you have to consider the maturity size of that tree and the maintenance costs associated with it. Do you want a low growing tree? Do you want a narrow tree? Do you want a classic tree shape? Each of those serves a different function. Then look at site conditions. What are your sun and wind exposure conditions? What kind of soil do you have? Is it sandy and well drained, or is it clay soil and not well drained? And look at the hardiness level of those trees. Do they grow well in a four-season part of the country with really low temperatures in the winter and really high dry temperatures in the summertime? And then finally, after that, look at species characteristics. What kind of growth habits do they have? Are they susceptible to pests? Are they susceptible to decay, especially as they get older and weaker? What kind of wood do they have? Is it a weak or is it a strong wood? All of these things you have to take into consideration when you're looking at planting what is essentially a long-term investment. And then pick the right species. So really what the answer is when you're looking for what is a good tree, a lot of times it comes down to look at native species, what's indigenous to your area, and plant those, because those are the trees that are going to do best at your house because they are indigenous or native to the area. Native species are best suited to local growing conditions. After all, they're indigenous to where we live. When you look at Indiana as a state, we have over 100 native tree species that are going to thrive and do well here. And that diversity of tree species reflects the varying types of soil and site conditions that we have, from loose and sandy up north to hard-packed clay and alluvial soils that we have here. So it's imperative to select a species that's adapted to the conditions of the site where you're planning on growing that tree. Makes sense, right? Each of those tree species has adapted to survive and thrive under certain site conditions. So if we pick a tree that matches naturally where we're going to plant it, we've got a head start on making sure that tree thrives and survives in those conditions around our house. So for us here in central Indiana in the Midwest, some good species to plant. I actually thought river birches were going to be on the no-no list. River birches are actually one of the better species you can plant here in central Indiana and in the Midwest, which is what makes them so popular, but do be careful where you plant them. They have relatively shallow and relatively unobtrusive roots. They are very versatile, fast-growing trees that are often used to frame the corner of a house. In fact, we had one on the front corner of our house, but it was planted too close to our house. And because it's so fast growing and because they can get so tall and so broad, we eventually had to take it out, um, because the very things that make that a desirable tree, when you plant it too close to a house, actually make it undesirable. But they can tolerate wet soils and dry summers, although as a gradual rule of thumb, they do prefer ample amounts of water. Just be careful with them because they are very fast growing. They can grow up to 3 feet per year with a mature height of anywhere from 40 to 70 feet and a mature width of 40 to 60 feet. So people tend to plant them too close to houses, but overall, they are fairly desirable trees. Oak trees are actually a pretty good species for us to plant, and popular varieties of those around here are white, English, northern oak, bur oak. They are actually one of the fastest growing trees in Indiana. They can get up to 80 feet tall, and it doesn't take them long to get to a height where they can provide shade for your yard. They are pretty low maintenance and can be grown in almost any type of soil. They tolerate pollution and they thrive in both heat and cold, and they're very attractive trees. In the fall, you're going to get oranges and reds and browns. So oaks, generally speaking, are pretty desirable trees, except when you plant them too close to your house, which we'll talk about here in a minute. And I know we've kind of been harping on maple trees, but maple trees actually planted properly are a fairly desirable species. Reds, Norways, which we talked about, sycamore, sugar, silver maples. Watch out for what are considered the soft maples, which a lot of those are, and you want to plant a hard maple species if you can, generally either a sugar maple or what's called a rock maple. Those are better maple trees, but they are slower growing, although they're longer lived. The good news with maples is they provide shade for you and your house. They tend to grow pretty quickly. They have large branches and leaves. They can be planted almost anywhere in your yard, but like we talked about earlier, keep that root growth in mind. They provide nice color in actually all 4 seasons, and they are pretty sturdy trees to grow here in Indiana because of their long, sturdy, robust root system. They can live well over 100 years, and they do withstand climate extremes like cold, wind, and heat, and there aren't a lot of diseases or pests that attack them. Just keep in mind they can be messy, especially those varieties with those little teeny tiny helicopter seeds. Um, and there are certain soft maple species like those silver maples that you probably want to avoid. So be careful which maple species you pick. So those are a couple of desirable varieties. Let's switch gears here before we run out of time and talk a little bit about trees in the home inspection. So when we see tree problems during an inspection, they generally fall into one of four categories: foundation damage, roof damage, plumbing damage, or other exterior damage. Most of those issues are caused by a tree that's too close in proximity to the house. So let's look a little more specifically at them. Foundation damage, well, it can be caused by any tree with robust, lateral, fast-growing root systems. Those are bad for foundations. Smaller trees with less invasive roots are safer, but not safe if you plant them too close to the house, but they're safer for growing closer to a house. Deciduous trees most commonly have these kind of problematic root systems, but some evergreen varieties are also dangerous for foundations. So the lesson here is really don't plant any tree too close to your house. When you look at particular species, the tree I just told you that was one of the more desirable species, oak trees are actually the most damaging trees for house foundations. Although the number of mature oak trees actually grown in residential areas is relatively small, oak trees account for more than 10% of the foundation damage caused by all trees. So oak trees do have, if they're planted too close to the foundation, particularly problematic roots. So don't plant them too close to your house. Ash trees can get tall and have root systems that get up to 30 feet wide. They're likely to grow under foundations and force them upwards, causing structural heaving and cracking. Ash trees are also responsible for damaging subsidence because they suck a lot of moisture out of the soil and dry out the dirt around your foundation. Poplar trees actually can grow well over 100 feet tall and have shallow, aggressive, very fast growing root systems that can cause severe damage to foundations by getting into the cracks in foundations and any gaps or voids around sewer pipes. What these trees are doing is putting their roots too close to the foundation, and it's actually not typically the roots that damage the foundation. It's actually because those tree roots cause soil shrinkage near the foundation as they remove water from the soil around that foundation. This is especially problematic in clay soils, which is basically what we have here, which hold a lot of moisture. When that moisture is gone, those soils shrivel and shrink, and that will cause that foundation to move and settle and crack. Then when you put water back into that soil, those roots are going to swell up again, and they're going to press in the opposite direction on that foundation. So when they get wet during the rainy season, those roots are going to expand and put a lot of pressure on that foundation. And on top of all of that, roots can also grow under the foundation, where they take up more and more space beneath your house, literally lifting the building up by tiny fractions. So that's why the damage occurs when you put those trees too close to your house. You can also get roof damage from trees from dangling and overhanging limbs that break off and fall on your roof. Leaves, sticks, twigs, moss, dead plant matter can quickly accumulate in your gutters, clogging them and causing moisture problems around your house. And then if a lot of that debris, those leaves, needles, debris is left laying on your roof, it holds moisture against your roof that can eventually cause rot and decay of shingles that can actually spread into the deeper components of your roof systems. So this one's a little bit more obvious. Trees drop things, and that can damage your roof. Roofs that are too damp or shady because of trees will fail quicker because of damage caused by mold and mildew. Birds, squirrels, bugs, all kinds of pests call trees home and may decide to move into your home if they can easily get to it. So an overhanging tree provides squirrels and chipmunks and raccoons and possums an avenue to your house where they will literally chew their way into your house and take up residence in your attic and walls. And then obviously a tree falling on your house can cause catastrophic damage to the structure. So making sure that trees are kept healthy and have good integrity to them is very important to maintenance, which we will talk about a little bit here in a second. Other exterior damage that can happen to a house: tree roots normally grow horizontally and not very far beneath the soil surface. Up to 90% of a tree's roots are close to the surface, and they are very opportunistic and will typically only grow and penetrate where it's easiest to grow. Unfortunately, this oftentimes means under and around sidewalks and driveways, because if they encounter solid impervious surfaces like that, they will redirect up, over, under, or around those areas and lift and heave and crack those concrete surfaces, causing exterior damage, or rubbing up against your house and causing exterior damage. And then the final one we want to talk about is tree roots actually cause plumbing damage. They're one of the most common causes of sewer and drain clogs. Trees send out roots to gather moisture and nutrients, and if they encounter your main drain or your sewer line, they will do their best to penetrate that and get through the tiniest little crack or void, um, to get that water and those nutrients that are actually in that waste flowing from your house. This is a pretty common for us to have to deal with in the real estate world and in the inspection world. Not as much of a problem with modern plastic drain materials, but older clay tiles, or what's called Orangeburg sewer pipe, which was basically a cellulose fiber and tar, those are very susceptible to tree roots, because the trees can actually over time break down and penetrate those materials and get into that drain, and they'll grow into that drain, and eventually they'll completely destroy the pipe material and also cause, well, up pretty significant and sometimes even up to total clogging of that drain, which can lead to standing water and really unpleasant, nasty spells in your yard. So we're kind of aware of this in the real estate world, but tree roots in your drain are a very common problem and can be a very serious one, costing tens of thousands of dollars to remedy. So let's look at some pictures real quick, then we'll do some maintenance, and then we'll be done. And I apologize if I go a couple minutes over our allotted half hour here, but I told you guys, once you get into this, there is an absolute ton of information about trees out there. So this is actually my wife's cousin's house where we did the inspection. This is an oak tree planted too close to the foundation, probably about 80 years old, with a trunk diameter of somewhere between about 6 and 8 feet. This is their driveway. This is obviously what a tree planted too close to the driveway can do. More importantly, this is the foundation where those oak tree roots are right up against it, causing all those problems we talked about earlier. It's one of the causes to this bowing foundation, but this particular wall, about 3 inches out of plumb, and roughly $15,000 just on this wall to fix the damage. Stuff falling on the roof, obviously not good for the roof of your house. Branches from that oak tree falling on the back of their property, damaging shingles. This is not their drain, but this is what tree roots can actually do to a plumbing drain. And look, this is newer PVC, so even new drain materials are not impervious to tree root damage. And then obviously a tree falling on your house can cause pretty substantial damage to that structure. So how do we maintain our trees to keep them in good shape and to stop all this damage from happening? Well, first of all, plant the right tree in the right place. Pick a native species, find the right spot for it. Make sure it's not too close to the house, make sure it's not too close to power lines. Basically, keep it away from your house. Water it to keep it in good shape. Mature trees need about 1 inch of water per week, and new trees require anywhere from 4 to 10 gallons each week for the first growing season or two. Mulch the tree roots to protect them from lawnmowers and keep them moist, keep that water where it belongs. And keep in mind that in the forest, natural plant materials feed the soil around trees, but we remove all that to keep our yards looking nice. So you, generally speaking, have to fertilize trees and test your soil periodically to make sure you're putting the right fertilizer down. Prune your trees. Don't just let them grow out of control. Proper trimming improves their structure while also removing any dead wood that might fall on your house. Do major pruning in the winter when the tree's dormant. You can do minor pruning in the summer. Don't prune in the fall, because that's when you're going to make that tree most susceptible to disease. And if you're really proactive, have an arborist come out and look at your trees periodically to help spot things like pests or diseases where you can treat them early before having to take that entire tree out because it's dying. Tree maintenance in your house: always trim and maintain tree roots if they start to get anywhere close to your foundation. And yes, you may have to do some digging, or you may have to have somebody come in and do that for you, but keep those tree roots away from your foundation. Always thoroughly investigate and immediately correct any potential tree-related foundation damage so it doesn't cost you tens of thousands of dollars to fix. Thinning trees, or honestly removing some of them too close to your house, may end up being the only way to remedy some of these problems and keep them healthy. Do that maintenance. If trees begin to sag, lean, show signs of disease or insect infestations, it may be too late. They may have to be removed altogether. So you've got to maintain trees just like you have to maintain other things around your house. And let's spend the last couple of minutes here asking some questions that people actually posted to us online when we put this class up, because honestly, we got more good questions on trees than we may have gotten on any other good class. So one of the questions we got a couple of times was, well, what's the distance that certain trees need to be from the foundation? The answer to that is at least a distance of half of their mature canopy width from a house. And that's just a rule of thumb. One of the other questions we got was, how big does the root system on trees get? And the answer we're all taught is that the root system on a tree is about the same size as the tree's canopy. That's actually probably not true. Most trees actually grow from 2 to 3 times the radius of their canopy. So if you have a tree that's 6 feet across, the radius of that is 3. That root ball on that tree is going to go anywhere from 6 to 9 feet out from the trunk of that tree, and may go as much as 5 feet out away from that tree. So I would plant trees actually probably twice the distance of the expected canopy size of that tree. How do you know when a tree's outgrown a space? There's lots of ways to know that, including it's become a hazard, it's outgrown its usefulness, it's infested, it's aging, it's dying. We touched on the answers to that hopefully earlier in this presentation. What trees or plants should I plant? My honest answer to that: native species. You can't go wrong with planting something that's grown here for tens of thousands of years. The Indiana DNR actually has a great list of trees and other indigenous species on its website. Plenty of options there to landscape with. How do you determine if it has a disease and what type? I am not an arborist, so the answer to this one, honestly, is probably have a professional come in and diagnose what's going on with that tree. And what should homeowners do if they already have some of the worst species of trees? Lots of homeowners have, well, actually a lot of homeowners have some of these undesirable trees because builders love them. They're inexpensive, they grow fast, they're symmetrical. The answer to that: keep an eye on them diligently, maintain them, and understand that eventually, because a lot of them are planted in the wrong location by builders, the only solution may eventually be removal of those trees. Couple more questions here and we are done. Which municipalities prohibit street trees, or is it the homeowners association? If you go and look up various municipalities, everybody has relatively similar rules for trees that can be planted in the right of way, so that section of yard between your sidewalk and the street, but they do vary a little bit. Here in McCordsville, where I live, it basically says no trees shall be planted in that town right of way unless the town has designated it a tree corridor. And then they provide you a list of specific species that you are allowed to plant. In Fishers, they basically say you can plant what you want in those right of ways as long as you pick from their published list of trees. So everybody's a little bit different, but surprisingly, most municipalities actually do post that information online. And then the final one, and I just thought this was a cool answer: why are pin oaks so popular as street trees? Pin oaks are actually one of America's most popular trees for big cities and suburban lawns, and that's because, unlike a lot of other species of oak trees, they have one very strong leader root and leader stem or trunk from which all the other branches grow. So their root system is not as extensive, and they're relatively easy to prune and keep under control, which has made them a very popular tree for planting in that right of way between the sidewalk and the street.